All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping into some really interesting source material that connects two things you probably wouldn't put together: ancient faith and the climate crisis.
I know. What on earth can an ancient tax collector teach us about climate change? It sounds a little out there, right? But stick with me. A recent sermon argues that this 2,000-year-old story, well, it actually gives us a kind of blueprint for the deep, systemic change we're all talking about today. So, to see how they get there, we first need to look at a modern declaration from the Korean Methodist Church. And what's really key here is how they frame this whole thing. For them, the climate crisis isn't just about policy or tech, it's a spiritual problem, a crisis of conscience.
And this quote, wow, it gets right to the heart of it. We mistook the economic development obtained by sacrificing the ecosystem for God's blessing. I mean, that's a really powerful statement. They're basically saying we got here because of a huge misunderstanding. We thought that progress, even when it wrecked the planet, was a good thing, a sign of being blessed. And according to the church, that's the core mistake we have to fix.
So their proposed solution is this idea they call ecological conversion. And, this isn't just about remembering your reusable bags at the grocery store. It's way deeper than that. It's about a fundamental shift in our entire mindset, our whole way of life. So what does a change that big actually look like?
Well, this is where it gets interesting. To answer that question, the sermon points us to a pretty unexpected place, a story that's 2,000 years old. And the argument here is that this ancient story holds the key, a kind of timeless blueprint for this exact kind of conversion.
Okay, so let's meet our main character. His name is Zacchaeus. He's a chief tax collector, which means back then he was super wealthy. But he was also basically a social pariah. People saw him as a collaborator with the Roman occupiers, a sinner who was getting rich off a system everyone felt was corrupt and unjust. So the story goes, he really wants to get a look at this influential teacher, Jesus. But there's a problem. The crowd is in his way. His view is completely blocked. And you can see this literally, of course. But the interpretation here is that it's also a metaphor. His perspective is blocked by the status quo, by the conventional thinking of everyone around him. And this is the first really important move he makes. He doesn't just shrug and go home. He does something pretty weird for a rich, important guy. He hikes up his robes and climbs a tree. And this is more than just trying to get a better vantage point. It's a deliberate choice, an action he takes to get a totally new perspective, to literally rise above the crowd and see things for himself. Okay, so this whole episode isn't just some random one-time thing. The analysis in the sermon shows that what happens to Zacchaeus actually follows a really clear three-step pattern. It's a framework for conversion, a model for change that can be repeated.
His transformation basically happens in 3 stages. First, he seeks out a new perspective. Then, that leads to an act of hospitality, of welcoming. And it all builds to this radical commitment to actually repay what he's taken. This is the blueprint for real change that the sermon is talking about.
So that first step, climbing the tree, that's his act of metanoia. Now, this is a key Greek word. It doesn't just mean saying you're sorry. It literally means to change one's mind, or to think differently after the fact. It's a total shift in perception. Zacchaeus had to see the world differently before he could ever act differently. All right, step 2. This happens when Jesus basically invites himself over to Zacchaeus' house, or his oikos. And this word oikos is so cool. It's the Greek root word for both economy and ecology. Think about that for a second. Our financial world and our natural world come from the exact same root, the concept of home. So by welcoming this new way of thinking into his house, Zacchaeus is starting to transform his whole oikos, his personal economy, his home, everything, into a place of healing and restoration. And that brings us to the third and honestly most crucial step. This whole conversion becomes real because he makes a public promise, a pledge. Zacchaeus doesn't just feel bad, he acts to make things right. He says he'll give half of everything he owns to the poor. That's him acknowledging his social debt. And then he says he'll repay anyone he cheated 4 times over. This is not a simple, I'm sorry. This is a full-blown radical plan for economic and restorative justice. Okay, so here's where we connect all the dots. How does this ancient story, this blueprint for personal change, connect to the actions that the climate declaration is calling for right now? The sermon is saying this isn't just a nice story. It's a practical guide for us today.
And you can see here just how perfectly it lines up. Zacchaeus climbing the tree to get a new perspective, well, that's the call to face the truth of the climate crisis. Him welcoming new life into his home, his oikos, that maps directly to the call to confess and re-embrace our broken relationship with creation. And his radical promise to repay his debts, that's our model for how we have to act and resolve to repair the ecological damage we've caused.
And this idea of modern-day repayment, it's not some vague concept. The resolutions in the climate declaration are today's version of Zacchaeus' pledge. We're talking about real, tangible actions on every level. That means changes in our own lives, right? Reducing our consumption, our carbon footprint. It also means big institutional changes, like switching our community buildings to sustainable energy. And it's about shifting our entire culture, moving away from consumerism towards sharing, and actively backing the scientists and activists who are on the front lines of this fight. It's a practical to-do list for making things right.
So when you put it all together, what started as a story about one person's change of heart becomes this incredibly powerful framework for a massive, collective, ecological change. It suggests that the answer to our biggest crisis isn't just about inventing new tech. It's about a new way of seeing, a new ethic. It's a pattern. See the truth, heal our relationship with our home, and then get to work repairing the damage. And that really leaves us with a pretty big question to think about. In our frantic search for all these brand new, high-tech solutions, could it be that some of the most powerful blueprints we need for our future have been right here with us all along, just waiting for us to find a new perspective, to climb that tree and really see?